Hello everyone, and welcome once again to Caleb Likes Books. Today I'm going to be doing a top 10 video for you, kind of a little bit of a sequel, I guess, to one of the first videos I did on this channel, which was a 5-book series that I wanted to read. And today I'm going to be doing my 10 series that now I currently want to read. So before I actually get into the top 10, first of all, there are plenty of other series besides these ones that I want to read. Those are just the 10 that I would say I most want to get into. And also, I am not including any series on here that I already own books from. So there are other series that I really am excited to start, like I'm excited and a little intimidated, but still excited to read Malazan Book of the Fallen. I recently got my hands on most of the Cradle books, and I'm excited to read that. You know, stuff like that where I already own the books in the series, and if I have the books in a series, then I am committing to at least starting that series. But I am including only series where I don't already own any of the books. So the first series I'm going to talk about is one that has not been written consistently by one author, but several different authors have contributed, and that is the Arkham Horror series. Now this series is tie-in books for the Arkham Horror. I believe it's a board game. And they are inspired by and based on the works of H.P. Lovecraft and his contemporaries, who all contribute to the Cthulhu mythos. I'm a big Lovecraft fan. He's one of my favorite authors. But I have not read a whole lot of Cthulhu mythos stories that were not written by him. And for those of you who don't know, Lovecraft is not the only one who wrote in the Cthulhu mythos. But there are many different authors that have done so because he actually encouraged other people to take his ideas and do their own thing with them, like his friends and stuff. He wanted them to kind of swap ideas back and forth with him. And so his work has been in the public domain basically ever since it was published. And so anybody can write within this, the Cthulhu mythos. And so there's a lot of different books that have been done for it, but I have not read very many of them. And the Arkham Horror series is one of the few series of books that I've found that does this. And they've got quite a few books. I haven't looked into any of them super heavily, but they do seem really cool, and I really want to read more Cthulhu mythos anyway. So that's my number 10. At number 9, I have a self-published series, which is The Bound and the Broken by Ryan Cahill. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. This is a series that I honestly don't know a whole ton about, but there's a booktuber by the name of Library of a Viking, who's a great channel. You should check him out. And he has sung this series' praises so many times, and he pretty much single-handedly has made me want to read it. But I've heard really good things about it. I've heard that this is one of the best recent self-published fantasy series out there. And it seems really interesting from the little I've heard about it. The covers look really cool, all that stuff. And I want to read more self-published books because at this moment, I've only read maybe 1 or 2 of them, if any at all. I don't think I've really read much or any self-published books. So I would like to read more of those, and you'll be seeing some other self-published series, or at least smaller, you know, ones that don't have as large of a fan base. Later in this list. And so I'd like to get into more of those, and Bound and the Broken is one that I'd like to check out. My number 8 is going to be one of the more popular series that I have seen, although I don't see it talked about a whole lot now. But when I was first getting into fantasy and booktube and stuff, and I was looking into some people's favorite series, this came up a lot, and that's The Legend of Drist by R.A. Salvatore. Now, if my memory is correct, I believe this is a Dungeons and Dragons series. Or something like that, which Dungeons and Dragons isn't a franchise that I'm really familiar with at all. But I've heard this is a really good series. I've read one of R.A. Salvatore's books before. He wrote Vector Prime, one of the Star Wars New Jedi Order books. And, you know, seeing a person who has written for Star Wars and then also having their own books, you know, that kind of makes me a little more interested in checking out their other stuff. And I've heard that this series is really fantastic. It strikes me as maybe being a little bit more of a classic fantasy type thing, which I want to get more into. and it just seems really cool. My number 7 is kind of similar to Legend of Drist in that it's a Dungeons and Dragons series and is a more classic fantasy sort of feel, at least that's the way it seems to me, and that's the Dragonlands books. These have been written by several different authors, and again, I've heard a lot of good things about the Dragonlance books, and again, you know, kind of covering that traditional classic fantasy sort of setting, and that style. And again, Dungeons and Dragons, I don't really know much about. I've never really been into it, but you know, it is a really popular fantasy series, at least with people who are into that more kind of 80s, 90s style fantasy. And so that seems really cool. Not much to really say about it because I don't really know a whole lot about it. The ones lower on this list I don't really know a whole lot about, to be honest, but they still pique my interest. And so that is my number 7. My number 6 is going to be one that I never really thought I was that interested in until fairly recently. And that is the Throne of Glass series by Sarah J. Maas. Now, this one, I don't really know why I'm interested in it, to be honest, because I'm not really into the whole book talk thing. And the series is very popular over there. I'm not really into YA fantasy, but this is a very popular YA fantasy series and, you know, all that stuff. But something about it just appeals to me, or like really kind of makes me want to read it. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's just because it is a very popular series. And so where it is very popular, I kind of want to check it out and see what all the hype is about. I've heard a lot of conflicting opinions on this series. I've heard, you know, some people say it's really good. I've heard other people say they don't really like it very much, or the same with other Sarah J. Maas books as well. And so I don't really know what to expect with it, but I do want to read it because it's so popular and because, you know, that makes it more interesting to me. Plus, I haven't really read much YA fantasy, and I'd kind of like to see what's up with that as well. My number 5 pick is going to be one that you may be surprised to see this low on the list considering who wrote it, and that is the Skyward series by Brandon Sanderson. Brandon Sanderson is probably my favorite author at the moment. I think he is fantastic. I've read most of his Cosmere books, and I love all of them that I have read. And Skyward is his YA series that is not in the Cosmere. I think it's kind of a sci-fi-ish series. So I'm really interested in it because it's Brandon Sanderson. I want to read more of his stuff. Plus, where it does seem to have that more sci-fi angle to it, I haven't read anything of his that hasn't been... I mean, not everything is extremely fantasy heavy because, you know, you have the Wax and Wayne books, which do have a kind of a more modernish setting and things like that. But all of his books that I've read have been pretty firmly set in the fantasy genre. So I think it would be really interesting to see him write something else. I've heard great things about the Skyward series as well. I've heard a lot of people really praising that series just as much as I've heard praise for the Cosmere, even though I don't think it's quite as popular as, you know, say Mistborn or the Stormlight Archive. I've heard, you know, across the board just as much praise for it. So I'm very excited to read those sometime. My number 4 is The Inheritance Cycle by Christopher Paolini. This is one that, or also known as the Aragon series, if you prefer. This is one that was really popular when I was growing up. You know, I grew up in the 2000s, so stuff like Aragon and Harry Potter and Golden Compass and things like that, you know, all the ones that were either coming out at that time or were getting adaptations around that time, were really popular when I was growing up. But I never really got into any of those, aside from the Chronicles of Narnia was really the only popular fantasy series at that time that I really got into growing up. And so this is one, along with stuff like Harry Potter and Percy Jackson and some others, that I do want to check out because it was very popular when I was growing up. And it seems pretty interesting to me. I've heard that it is very tropey. It's very, you know, if you've been reading fantasy, it's probably not going to be anything I haven't seen before. But because it was very popular when I was growing up and all that stuff, I do want to check it out. And it does seem really cool. My number 3 is one that I have heard so many incredible things about, so I'm very excited to read it eventually. And it is one series, but it's all split up into multiple sub-series. And that is The Realm of the Elderlings by Robin Hobb. This is, I think, a 16-book series, split into several trilogies and things like that. This is one that I am super excited to check out eventually because Robin Hobb and this series in general is alongside the likes of Brandon Sanderson and George R. R. Martin and Tolkien, and you know, all those other big authors. Robin Hobb and this series is some of the most unanimously praised fantasy that I have ever seen, like on BookTube and things like that. People seem to really, really love Realm of the Elderlings, and so I'm really excited to read it. I've heard some people say that they can't really get into it, you know, in some of the early books. They don't really like the main character, or the pacing is not quite for them, or things like that. But I am really excited to read it eventually. It seems very interesting, and it is a really big series, which also kind of makes it more interesting to me, kind of expanding over this long period of time and all that stuff. So I'm really looking forward to reading Realm of the Elderlings. My number 2 is a sci-fi series, and that is The Expanse by James S.A. Corey. This is another one I've heard a lot of praise for, and I haven't read very much sci-fi outside of like the Star Wars novels, and so I do really want to read some more sci-fi eventually. And The Expanse is, again, one of the most widely praised sci-fi series that I've seen, and it seems really interesting. I've heard a lot of people really praising it a lot. For example, Daniel Green, who is one of the most popular booktubers out there, seems to really enjoy this series. And I've heard that it is like really consistent, like each book is really, really good, and all that stuff, and basically everything I've heard about it just makes me really want to read it. And so that is my number 2. And my number 1 is a series by an author that I do have a book of that I'm going to be reading soon, or may have already read by the time this video comes out. But I haven't read this particular series, and that's The Faithful and the Fallen by John Gwynne, as well as there's a sequel series as well, but I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head. But that series of books. John Gwynne, again, very widely praised fantasy author. I've heard so many incredible things about his work. And at the time of recording this video, I have not yet read his book Shadow of the Gods, which I am planning to read this month in June. But I have heard incredible things about all of his books, and so I'm really excited to read that, and I'm also excited to read Faithful and the Fallen eventually. From what I've heard, it does sound really interesting, and you know, it's a very popular series, so again, it has that going for it. You know, if something's popular, I kind of want to see what that's all about. And based on what I've heard about John Gwynne, he seems very much up my alley, and everything I've heard about his books has been incredible, so I'm very, very excited to read some of his stuff. But anyways, that is pretty much it for this video, so let me know down in the comments what you thought of my picks. If there are any of these that you also are looking forward to reading, or if you've read any of them, what you thought of them, and all that stuff. And let me know down in the comments as well some series that you are interested in reading eventually. And that is pretty much it for this video, so thank you all for watching, and I will see you guys next time.